It was 9:10 a.m. when they erased me. My name is Luke Mercer. I was 47 years old, and I had spent almost a decade building the system that kept their entire company alive. That morning, I sat inside a glass-walled executive room on the 18th floor. The city was bright outside, but inside that room, everything felt cold and sharp. Too clean, too controlled. Across the table were the people who now acted like they owned everything I had built. A young VP cleared his throat. Marcus Hale, late 30s. Always perfect suit. Always perfect smile. He looked at me like I was already gone. "Luke," he said, sliding a paper forward, "this is a restructuring decision. Your role will be phased out effective immediately. No warning. No discussion. Just a sentence." I remember looking at his mouth more than his eyes. I was waiting for him to correct himself. But he didn't. On the screen behind him, the system org chart changed in real time. My name disappeared from the architecture leadership node. Just like that. 8 years of work reduced to a blank space. Someone in the room adjusted their tie. Another avoided eye contact. No one said a word for me. Marcus continued, calm and rehearsed. "Your contribution will remain valuable as institutional knowledge, but leadership will be handled by new structure moving forward." Institutional knowledge. That phrase stayed in my head like a weight. It meant I was useful, but not important. Not anymore. I nodded slowly, like I understood. Like it didn't matter. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not panic. Something quieter. Awareness. Because while they were speaking, I could still see the system running on the monitors behind them. Live dashboards. Real-time operations. Client routing. Payment flows. Security layers. All of it still carried my design logic. They were talking like I was optional, but their entire company was still breathing through my architecture. I stood up. My chair didn't make a sound. Even that felt intentional in that room. No one stopped me. No one thanked me. No one even looked relieved. That told me everything I needed to know. As I walked toward the door, Marcus added one last line. "We appreciate your professionalism through this transition." Transition. Like I was a software update. I paused for half a second, hand on the glass door handle. I looked back. The room was already moving on without me. Screens were shifting. People were speaking softly again, as if I had already been removed from reality itself. But I noticed something they didn't. The system alerts in the corner of the screen. Small warnings. Not errors. Just signs. Things only I would understand. I opened the door and stepped out. The hallway outside was quieter than the room, but it felt heavier. Each step I took away from that room sounded final. No arguments followed me. No apology came. Just silence. And in that silence, one truth became clear to me. They didn't fire a man. They disconnected the only person who understood what would happen next. And I knew, without any doubt, they had no idea what they had just removed. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat in my small house on the edge of the city, staring at my laptop that I had used for years to fix their problems at 3 a.m. when no one else could. Now it just felt heavier. My wife was asleep in the next room. I didn't wake her. There was no point explaining something she had warned me about years ago. "They will forget you the moment you stop being useful," she once said. I told her loyalty meant something. I wasn't sure anymore. I leaned back and remember how it started. 8 years ago, their entire system was falling apart. Slow servers, broken client flows, security gaps everywhere. Every department blaming another. They brought me in as a technical specialist. But within weeks, I realized the truth. There was no real system. Just layers built on panicked decisions and old fixes nobody fully understood anymore. So I rebuilt it, piece by piece, night after night. I was the one who stayed when everything crashed at 2 a.m. I was the one who wrote the fixes no one else could read. I was the one who mapped dependencies no one even knew existed. And I never left, not even when I should have. I remember one winter night, clearly. Power outage in half the building. Everyone left, except me. I worked by flashlight until the system stabilized again. When morning came, they called it team effort. There was no team, just me. But I didn't complain. I believed effort would eventually be seen. It wasn't. Instead, younger executives started arriving. MBA titles, sharp suits, clean language. They didn't understand the system, but they understood meetings. So they got promoted. I stayed where I was. Senior systems architect. Same title for years. No matter how much I built, no matter how much they depended on it. And still, I warned them. Multiple times. I told them certain modules were fragile if changed without understanding the dependency chain. I explained how one small adjustment could create cascading failures. They smiled, nodded, then ignored it. Because people don't listen when things are working. They only listen when they break. That night, after I was removed, I opened the system logs again. Old habit. Everything was still running, but I could see what others couldn't. Small changes already starting to ripple through. Not failures yet, just tension in the structure. Like a building shifting before cracks appear. That's when it hit me clearly. Only a few people in that entire company truly understood how it all held together. And most of them were gone or under people who didn't. I closed the laptop slowly. Not because I was done, but because I realized something important. They didn't just remove me from a role. They removed the only safety layer they never saw. And now, the system was alone, just like I was. By the third week, they acted like I had never been there. That's how companies protect themselves. They rewrite memory faster than they replace people. Marcus Hale stepped fully into my space. Same office, same chair, same system dashboards, but none of the understanding. I saw it through small things first. Settings changed that didn't need to be changed. Labels renamed for clarity. Modules simplified because they looked too complex. Marcus called it modernization, but I knew what it really was. Sanding down a machine they didn't understand until it stopped looking dangerous. I stayed quiet, not because I agreed, because I wanted to see how far confidence would go without knowledge. The company followed him quickly. Meetings became louder. Decisions became faster. Confidence replaced caution. They believed removing me meant removing dependency. It didn't. It just removed awareness of dependency. And that is more dangerous. 2 weeks later, I got an email from a junior engineer. Someone I trained once, briefly, years ago. No subject line. Just a message. Sir, why did they remove the fallback logic in Module 4? The system feels unstable. That line stayed with me. Feels unstable. Not broken yet. Just wrong. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because once you step back into something like that, you either fix it or you become responsible for it again. And I wasn't ready to be either. Meanwhile, Marcus kept pushing forward. He held meetings where he explained my old system like it was a theory he had discovered. He used phrases like streamlined architecture and eliminated legacy complexity. People nodded like it made sense. But I knew what they didn't. The system wasn't simple. It was layered for survival. Every complex part they removed had a reason for existing. One afternoon, I logged in remotely, not to interfere, just to observe. I watched changes being deployed live. Small ones, harmless ones they thought, but I could see the ripple pattern. A dependency chain was starting to drift. Not enough to break yet, just enough to weaken timing accuracy across multiple services. I leaned back in my chair. That feeling returned. The one you get when you see a bridge being dismantled while cars are still driving on it. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. A junior engineer messaged me again, this time more direct. They said we don't need the old architecture diagrams anymore. Are they sure? I stared at the message for a long time, because that was the real mistake. Not removing me, removing memory. The company believed control came from leadership, but control in systems like this comes from understanding what you are standing on. And Marcus had no idea. He was walking on something he couldn't see. And worse, he thought it was stable. That was the illusion. Everything looked fine on the surface. Clean dashboards, green status lights, smooth reports to executives. But underneath, the structure was shifting, quietly, patiently, waiting. And I realized something sitting there in the silence of my home office. They hadn't replaced me. They had just removed the only person who could hear the system breathe. It started on a Tuesday. At first, no one noticed. That's how all real failures begin. Quiet, invisible, almost polite. At 10:14 a.m., the first delay appeared in the transaction pipeline. Not a crash, just lag. A few seconds longer than normal, then a few seconds more. By noon, internal dashboards started freezing during peak loads. Still, leadership stayed calm. Marcus called it temporary load variance. I watched from home. No emotion, just observation. Because I already knew what I was seeing. It wasn't load. It was structure responding to something it no longer recognized. By 2 p.m., client systems started reporting inconsistencies. Invoices delayed. Data mismatches. Support tickets rising. Still, Marcus insisted the system was stable. He said it in a meeting I watched remotely. Everything is within acceptable performance thresholds. But I knew that phrase. It means we don't understand it, but we hope it holds. At 3:12 p.m., a major enterprise client called directly. Not support, not account management. They asked for escalation. And then they said something that changed the entire room. We want Luke Mercer on the call. Silence followed, because they assumed I was replaceable. Clients didn't. That was the difference. Inside the company, panic started forming in layers. Engineers began checking logs. But something was wrong. The documentation no longer matched the system behavior. Because the simplifications Marcus approved had removed context. And without context, even experts were blind. I leaned forward slightly when I saw that part. Not because I was surprised, because it was happening exactly as I had once warned them. By evening, errors spread across multiple services. Not full outages. Fragmentation. The worst kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that confuses. Marcus called an emergency technical meeting. I wasn't invited, but I watched anyway. Engineers argued. Some blamed infrastructure. Others blamed network changes. No one wanted to say the truth out loud, because the truth pointed backward, to decisions made after I left. And by 7 p.m., something changed. A senior engineer finally said it. We can't trace the root cause without the original architecture maps. That sentence landed like a crack in glass, because it meant what I already knew. They could see the symptoms, but not the system. And somewhere in that silence, Marcus realized something he had refused to accept since the day I left. They didn't just lose a worker. They lost the only person who could explain why it still worked. And I sat there, watching it unfold, thinking one simple thing. This wasn't failure yet. This was just the system introducing itself without me holding it together. By the next morning, the situation stopped being internal. And that's when fear started to grow legs. At 8:47 a.m., another major enterprise client escalated their complaint. Not about delays this time, about trust. They said their systems were no longer behaving predictably. That word hit harder than any technical error. Predictably, because that was what I built into everything. Marcus tried to control the situation with statements and reassurance calls. But reassurance doesn't fix uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads faster than any system update. By midday, 3 more clients asked for escalation. And then it happened again. A direct request. Not for support. Not for a manager. For me. Is Luke Mercer still available? We need him on this immediately. Inside the company, that request spread like a silent alarm. Because it meant something no one wanted to admit yet. The outside world still trusted me more than the system that replaced me. Marcus tried to shut it down in a leadership call. I watched it remotely again. He said, "We are fully capable of handling legacy stability without dependency on former staff." But I could see it on their faces. They didn't believe it anymore. Because the system was no longer behaving like something understood. It was behaving like something tolerated. That afternoon, internal messages started leaking between departments. Not official reports. Private chats. Engineers asking each other the same question in different words. Did Luke ever document this part? And the answer they all feared was the same. Not fully. Because I didn't need to. I was there when it broke. That was the difference they never understood. By evening, more clients started pushing back. Revenue-impacting delays were no longer minor issues. They were visible losses. Real money. Real consequences. And suddenly, Marcus was no longer the confident replacement. He was the person standing in front of a system that refused to behave according to his expectations. I received indirect messages again. Old colleagues. Quiet tone. No greetings. Just urgency. Things are getting bad. Can you at least advise? I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the moment I stepped in, I would no longer be outside this story. I would become part of their solution again. and I had already seen what they did to solutions once they stopped appreciating them. But what changed everything was what I saw next. Internal teams started rebuilding fragments of my old design. Not officially, quietly, like people trying to reconstruct a bridge from memory while still standing on it. That's when I understood something deeper. They didn't just need me. They were starting to remember why they needed me. And that is the most dangerous stage in any system failure. Not when it breaks, but when people begin to realize it was never as simple as they believed. And Marcus? He was beginning to lose control of the narrative he built, because reality was now speaking louder than leadership. It happened at 2:47 a.m. No warning, no slow decline, just silence turning into collapse. I was still awake, not because I expected it, because I knew the shape of what was coming. First, the payment system stopped responding. Then routing services froze. Then internal communication tools lagged like they were drowning. One by one, the system began to disconnect from itself, like it was forgetting how to breathe. At the company's operations center, panic arrived instantly. Emergency calls flooded every channel. Engineers logged in faster than they could think. Marcus was pulled into the crisis room half-dressed, still trying to understand what was happening. But the system wasn't giving answers anymore, because it wasn't just failing. It was fragmenting, and fragmentation is worse than collapse. Collapse is obvious. Fragmentation is confusion. By 3:10 a.m., someone finally said the words no one wanted to say. This looks like a dependency chain failure. But even I was incomplete, because the real issue wasn't just dependency. It was missing structure knowledge, the kind I used to carry in my head, the kind I never fully documented because no one ever asked me to. Now they needed it, but it wasn't there. Engineers started digging through old repositories, old diagrams, old notes, but they were outdated because the system had been modernized without understanding what held it together. I sat in silence watching system logs scroll across my screen, not celebrating, not reacting, just seeing the outcome of decisions made without me. And then came the moment Marcus finally understood. A senior engineer looked at him and said, "Half of this system only works because of undocumented logic Luke built." The room went quiet. That sentence changed everything, because it meant the system was never fully theirs. It was borrowed stability, held together by understanding they removed. By 4 a.m., critical services were down across multiple regions. Clients were waking up to failures. Emails were already being sent. Calls were already being made. And inside the company, the illusion finally collapsed. This was not a glitch. This was exposure. Marcus stared at the screen like it had betrayed him, but hadn't. The system was simply doing what systems do when they are altered without comprehension. It revealed the truth, and the truth was simple. They didn't upgrade it. They destabilized it. And now, there was only one name left in the room that could make sense of what was happening. Mine. And somewhere in that chaos, I knew what would come next. Not recovery, not resolution, but a call they had been avoiding since the day they thought I was replaceable. The call came at 4:38 a.m. I didn't rush to answer it. I already knew why they were calling. The screen lit up with a name I had seen in meetings for years, but never like this. Marcus Hale. No title this time. No polished confidence. Just his name. I let it ring once, then twice. Then I answered. For a moment, no one spoke, just breathing on the other end. Then another voice jumped in. An executive. Older. Tired. "Luke, we need your help." No greeting. No formal tone. Just collapse disguised as a sentence. I stayed quiet, because silence tells people more than words when they are finally listening. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was different now. Lower. Strained. "We're having a system-wide failure. We can't stabilize it. Clients are already escalating." Still no apology. Not yet. They weren't there emotionally. They were still in survival mode. I leaned back in my chair and asked one question. Simple. Controlled. Why did you remove the one person who understands it? No one answered immediately. That silence lasted longer than any technical outage, because it wasn't about systems anymore. It was about judgment. Finally, Marcus spoke again. We thought we could modernize it without dependency issues. I exhaled slowly, not in anger, in confirmation. That was the problem. They thought understanding was optional. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was still dark. But somewhere in that darkness, their company was burning through every assumption they had ever made. They started explaining more. Failures, clients, revenue loss, panic. But I wasn't listening to excuses. I was listening for truth. And I already knew it. When they finished, I asked for access logs, change history, deployment records, every detail of what they had done after I left. Marcus hesitated, then agreed, not because he trusted me, but because they had no other option. Before ending the call, I said something that made the silence heavier. I'm not your employee anymore. Another pause. Then I added, if I fix this, it won't be because you asked correctly. And I ended the call. I didn't feel powerful. That's not what this was. It was clarity. They were not negotiating with a former worker. They were asking the architect to look at a building he already knew was cracking. And somewhere in that moment, I understood something important. They didn't need leadership now. They needed memory. And I was the only one left who still had it. I returned 2 hours later, not as an employee, not as a consultant, as something they didn't have a category for anymore. External authority. That was the closest label they could give it. The company didn't look the same when I walked in. It never does after failure. People move differently. They speak less. They wait more. Marcus met me in the hallway. No confident handshake this time, just exhaustion behind his eyes. He didn't try to lead me. He followed. I walked straight into the operations room. The same screens, same systems. But now they look different. Not because they changed, but because I could finally see them without illusion. I asked for access. Full logs. No restrictions. They gave them to me because they had no leverage left. And then I saw it. Exactly what I expected. Changes made without understanding dependency flow. Modules simplified into instability. Logic removed because it looked unnecessary on paper. But systems don't care about paperwork. They care about structure. I started working silently. No speeches. No explanations. Just correction. Step by step. Line by line. The room watched without interrupting. At first, they didn't understand what I was doing. Then they started to. Every fix I made revealed something worse. A decision that had quietly weakened stability. A change that broke a hidden dependency chain. A shortcut that created long-term collapse. And slowly, the room stopped breathing loudly because they were finally seeing it. This wasn't random failure. It was predictable consequence. By morning, systems began stabilizing. Not fully restored yet, but no longer collapsing. Clients started sending confirmations that services were returning. You could feel the relief spreading across the building. But I didn't stop, because fixing symptoms is easy. Fixing structure is what matters. Marcus stood behind me at one point, quiet, no authority left in his voice. I didn't realize it was this fragile. I didn't look at him when I replied. It wasn't fragile. A pause. You made it fragile. No anger, just fact. By midday, critical systems were back online. Not because of leadership, not because of strategy, but because someone finally understood what they were standing on. When everything stabilized, executives gathered in the room. They started talking about recovery plans, messaging, public statements, damage control. But none of that mattered to me anymore, because the system was no longer in danger, and neither was their ignorance. I removed my access, closed my terminal, and stood up. Marcus tried to speak, but stopped. He understood now. There was nothing left to say that would change what had already been proven. As I walked out of the building, no one followed. No one stopped me. Not this time, because now they knew something they didn't understand before. They didn't lose me when they fired me. They lost me when they stopped needing to understand what I built. And that difference changed everything.